Going on as usual. Today is Saturday, April 26th, 2025, and the United Kingdom their government wants to rent houses for illegal migrants, channel migrants, for the next 5 years. They're calling on landlords to get in on this deal. They're paying premium for rent, and so incentivizing people to house migrants in their homes, etc. And it's going to drive up rent for the citizens there. It's not good. Very, very bad. Upside down crosses at the Pope's funeral today. So we'll look at that. And some people have been trying to give me shade about my position on the Pope. I don't think he was somebody. He was installed by Obama and Clinton in a situation that hasn't happened in 600 years, where the sitting Pope stepped down. And Benedict was, well, I don't know if he was a good guy or a bad guy, but if Obama and Clinton come and say, you leave or we're going to, I think there's way more to that whole story than we know. And Francis, there's more to him than we know as well. And I'll show you that. So Pierre Poilievre has said that MPs will sit through the summer to get important bills passed. And Carney and Arya have some interesting past. And this guy says that their plan to install Carney goes back at least to 2020, and it's diabolical. And the moves made, he says that he's fairly certain were pre-planned and not an accident. He talks about Arya. He talks about the disqualification from the Liberal race, from the Liberal leadership race, and Chandra's son being the CEO of Brookfield's India arm, and so on and so forth. And it all ties up with Carney being in charge and everybody getting a nice little payoff. And I think, man, it's an interesting take. It's certainly worth thinking about. Anyway, I don't know if it's completely legit, but I think most of the stuff that he's talking about checks out. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. There's CPC rallies, all sorts of things, crazy things happening for the NDP, and not like crazy good things. People behaving in crazy ways, and the NDP not looking good because of it, but the NDP doesn't denounce any of the crazy things that their supporters do, and that's weird, right? Like it's kind of strange. And sometimes they'll claim that they're not responsible, like this person isn't affiliated with us or whatever. But still, it's very, very interesting. Anyway, lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to start with Mark Carney and the Liberals. And Mark Carney is himself seemingly worse than Justin Trudeau in a lot of different ways, right? Diabolical, underhanded, methodical, plotting, right? Planning, which Justin Trudeau couldn't be accused of those things because you'd have to have a brain for that, right? So anyway, here is this guy. I don't know who this guy is, but he is putting out a pretty strong case, and the video itself is 6 minutes long, so it's a little beyond this, but he summarizes here, and I think it's interesting. I think it's worth paying attention to. Here we go.
Their investments. Mark Carney calls the minimum legal allotted time for an election, which is 36 days. So the election will be over before he makes any disclosure. We still have a problem. He doesn't have a seat. The process to get a seat, which gives a lot of credibility to speak in the House of Commons, is also a minimum 36-day election period. The problem there is that this puts him past the 60-day disclosure period, and if he doesn't have a seat, this information might destroy his chances of getting that seat. So on March 20th, 2025, they revoke Characterizing Arya's nomination, and Mark Carney gets his seat. For all intensive purposes, Chandra gave him that seat. The succession of events all the way back to 2020 have been premeditated at a 95% chance. Mark negotiated a $250 million loan in October last year, met with the CCP in May of last year, advised the federal government to make investments in the exact same project as Brookfield, which he is 100% making profit from for the next 15 years. This man is one of the coldest, most calculating people I have ever seen. And the fact that Brookfield relocated its headquarters appears to me that they are fully under the impression that Mr. Carney can manipulate policy in order to increase the net profit tenfold. And he's already done it.
So there you go. His breakdown is, he thinks that Mark Carney has done this in a very, very calculated way in order to get himself into the position that he's in. Interesting. Rebel News is doing an expose on tax havens, similar stuff, basically the moves they've made with Brookfield. And Brookfield, explained by Ezra, is like a little BlackRock, right? BlackRock is a fund management thing. Brookfield is a fund management thing. They own things on behalf of investors, right? And so the Isle of so they are well versed in tax havens. They are well versed in how to avoid paying taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And so Ezra Levant goes to the Isle of Man to uncover a different branch of Carney's tax avoidance scheme, basically. But because he's a international investor who owns Brookfield or used to chair Brookfield or whatever, this is all seen as totally above board and normal, I guess. Everybody's just fine with it, I guess. Anyway, Ezra Levant does a whole breakdown talking about how the Isle of Man is used to avoid paying Canadian taxes, and it has a cap on tax rates that you pay. So regardless of the tax rate and regardless of the bill, you can only pay so much. And that's interesting. Concerned Canadian says this is one of a myriad of shell companies that Carney used to avoid paying Canadian taxes for Brookfield. The CRA must investigate. The company and their officers must be held accountable. We'll see. I don't know. It's a 20-minute video, so I'm not going to show you any of it. But I watched 5 minutes and it was well done. So you should check it out probably. Link is in the description if you're interested. It's also on the screen. CBC Watcher is highlighting this. Le Journal de Montreal, link right there, says tax avoidance, Mark Carney's firm in litigation against Canada Revenue Agency. Brookfield accused of tax avoidance on large sums by the Canada Revenue Agency. Like, this isn't good news for a campaign. When a campaign is having this kind of stuff 3 days before Election Day, that's seen as bad, problematic, right? Like, ruh-roh, how are we going to message to everybody that we're not tax dodgers? And that's hard to do when people are saying, hey, the company that he runs are tax dodgers, right? Tax avoidance. And CBC Watcher's got some quotes. Tax avoidance, Mark Carney's firm in litigation against Canada's Revenue Agency. Brookfield accused of tax avoidance on large sums. According to court documents obtained this week, the tax authorities accused Brookfield of orchestrating a maneuver that allowed it, for all intents and purposes, to avoid paying any tax on a staggering $183 million foreign exchange gain in 2012 related to foreign currency transactions. So I don't know exactly the process they did to do that, but that's the allegation. And so, wow, right? Eyebrow raising. That's a big sum of money. Here's National Post. The National Post has multiple opinion piece articles talking about how Mark Carney is a liar. And everybody and their dog is talking about how Mark Carney's a liar. I was highlighting it yesterday, but it's continued today and even doubled down. There are more articles today calling Mark Carney a liar than there were yesterday, which is crazy. National Post is saying Mark Carney is a misinformation machine. Right, and this is another one, Mark Carney. Oh, this is the same one. Sorry, I thought it was a different one. But fundamentally, Mark Carney is lying. He's lying a lot, and everybody sees it. Everybody is watching this and saying that's really problematic. National Citizens Coalition says even the CBC has been forced to admit Mark Carney based his entire campaign on a lie. This lie is the Trump phone call lie. Right, and so interesting. Carson says, can anyone keep up with the Liberal leader's false statements? And absolutely incredible. This we already know about the Trump phone call and what he said and what he represented and what was actually true wasn't true, or what was said at the phone call is not what he told anybody. So it's all very interesting. Michael says, so Carney brought down the carbon tax and then immediately introduced a multi-tier carbon tax, including on imports. He couldn't even hold his line until the election was done. This idiot will be the end of us. So talking about carbon taxes, Mark Carney is talking about here, and there's another one talking about how carbon taxes will make people richer and able to leapfrog their American competitors, but he doesn't explain how. So it's weird. So these two clips are kind of related. Also, Brittany was highlighting that the shiny helmets of tradespeople indicates that these are new helmets. They don't have any stickers. They need stickers to show their qualifications or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but they need stickers on their helmets, or a lot of people have stickers on their helmets, and the helmets usually look banged up. These helmets look brand new. Every single one of these helmets look brand new. So are these stand-in people because regular people didn't want to stand behind Carney? I have questions. Anyway, here's Mark Carney talking about this.
We have three aspects of our climate plan that are relevant here. One is there is an industrial carbon price, but the question is what happens with the proceeds from that carbon price and to what extent is it reinvested in the industry? And we're literally about to see the reality of that as the electric car line comes on and the 70% reduction in carbon that comes from that through SIF investments, partnerships, Canada Infrastructure partnerships with the province of Ontario, and of course the drive of the workers and innovation here at Algoma. So that's an example. That's one example. The second example, which is something we've also committed to, Alex, which is as our businesses, as our big industry decarbonize, we don't want foreign steel coming here that's high carbon, right? From Asia, from America. So we will have a carbon border adjustment mechanism that prevents that from happening and puts them in a stronger position. So that's the second. And then the third aspect is we have this carbon market that's in place, and we have an opportunity so that the large polluters, on the marginal reductions that they make, that they can pay for people's climate smart choices. It will end up being a more efficient market for them. The government will stand in the middle and make sure that people have clear incentives, and if we are elected, we will put this in place.
So I'm not sure how having more barriers at the border with carbon pricing tariffs at the border, et cetera, protects us. Although if it's just for the steel industry, that's one thing. But once you open that door, I think it's going to be for everything, right? And they're going to try and get their fingers in every pot. I don't understand at all how the statement he makes here is true, where him saying that these carbon taxes will allow Canada to be competitive and to leapfrog their competitors, their American competitors. I don't think that's possible. But here's Carney trying to spin that tale.
There's a looming trade war with the United States and the industrial carbon tax in place. I'm wondering if in your plans to support Canadian industries, you would consider exempting companies from the industrial carbon tax, particularly like ones like Algoma Steel, which are actively working towards having greener technologies in place in the near future.
So what's happening is that there's a couple things here. One is that there's a value to that industrial carbon tax in the predictability of that tax and the certainty around. It encourages the types of investments that help companies such as Algoma leapfrog their competitors, and leapfrog in many cases their American competitors, but international competitors.
It's so thin. I mean, like maybe he's right, but it's not. I don't think he's right. Like it's counterintuitive. It's like your gas is 50% more expensive than other gas, and that gives you an advantage. Okay, how? It just does. Nah, right? And like maybe there's a rationality thing where he's talking about, I think what he's talking about personally is the powers that be are going to say, if you don't have these climate change things in place, we're not going to trade with you. So we're going to trade with Canada because you don't have these climate change things in place. That's what I think he's saying, that gives them an advantage. And that's the reason it's thin. Personally, that's what I think. So here is Chris, and she says, unbelievable. Carney just said his industrial carbon tax will help Canadian steel industry. Remember when Trudeau said his carbon tax was making you richer? The pipe workers trade union warns Carney's carbon tax will decimate Canada's steel industry. So yeah, what he says is not borne out in reality. Here is Juno News, and it says Premier Scott Moe asks Mark Carney to urgently engage with China to eliminate canola tariffs that threaten Saskatchewan jobs and farmers. Here's Scott Moe, and he's the only one. I don't think there's anybody even across the country. Most of the influencers I see don't talk about the China tariffs, don't talk about the impact of canola. I think it's weird. I think it's strange that nobody's really interested in these impacts, because they are big impacts. Here's Scott Moe.
I've asked Prime Minister Carney on multiple occasions. He needs to reach out. He said he would reach out at the highest levels with President Xi and his government to find a path, and to commit to finding a path to a tariff-free environment when it comes to canola oil and canola meal. This is a significant market for Saskatchewan, as all of our markets are for our Saskatchewan products. Second, we're reaching out at the subnational level, again, to advocate and educate on the importance of accessing these products from Saskatchewan and why that matters. We've reached out to not only the Canadian ambassador to China, but also the Chinese ambassador to Canada, and are looking at how can we advocate with subnational leaders within the country of China. But we need that engagement from the federal level, when my understanding has not occurred yet. And so I ask for it again. We are Canadians in Saskatchewan, and the biggest and most significant and urgent challenge that we face when it comes to the tariff conversation is not the United States of America. It is China with their 100% tariff on canola oil and canola meal. It will result in job loss. We're doing everything we can to diversify that market, which we've had to do before, not to this degree. But we need our federal government to represent Saskatchewan farmers and the Saskatchewan canola industry, and I'd ask them to do so.
Yay! Yikes! It's pretty unnerving because they're talking about a lot of jobs, a lot of facilities, right? So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen there, and it doesn't look like the federal government is taking it seriously at all. There's no urgency around that whatsoever, as far as I've seen. Concerned Citizen says this is a party with a culture of systemic corruption. It is so ingrained in the party that they believe they now operate with impunity. We must find a way to hold them accountable. We are a nation of laws, and that should apply to all. This is Mark Carney being asked about ethics laws, and he says, there's been a lot of strengthening of the ethics laws in recent years. No need to really do anything else. So he doesn't want to change anything. Not surprising. Here's Mark Carney.
Ethics?
Look, I think there have been a number of reinforcements over the course of the last decade on the ethics side. I think that I would distinguish between the rules and the conduct, and if there are specific proposals, obviously we would look at them. But what's important is bringing that spirit of obviously the highest integrity. I think my track record is consistent with that, but also that commitment that goes with it to transparency, which was the second part of your question. Thank you.
Interesting how he views himself, right? It's not how I view him at all. FT World says Canadians bombarded with right-wing online content ahead of voting. I don't think so. Andy Lee says there are probably 50 newsworthy stories on my timeline in the last month alone on foreign interference, and you went with this. Wow. So misinformation and disinformation is being peddled by media that is supported by the government and supported by Liberals, think tanks, NGOs, things like that. Joe Warmington is responding to, is sharing Glenn's video, and he says they just got caught, and it's a media cover-up pushed in this clip by someone you can tell doesn't even believe what she's spinning. Pierre Poilievre was right to flag it, and no amount of media party heckling or intimidation stopped me from asking about it. So Joe Warmington asked Poilievre a question about the really kind of crazy report that was written about how Canadians might be hunting and fishing and living in gated societies and no social mobility whatsoever. You can't move up in the social ladders. You can't move down. Well, you can move down, but you can't move up. You can't afford a house, and so on and so forth. And now they're trying to say that the report is from people who you don't even need to listen to it. It's fine. Don't even worry about it, right? And so Joe Warmington says it's interesting that they're trying to do this damage control now that people have started to pay attention to these reports. Here we go. And she doesn't sound like she really believes what she's saying, according to Joe. Yeah, a little bit. She doesn't seem enthusiastic about what she's saying. Let's say that.
I want to correct the record there. Poilievre was waving around a social mobility report that was prepared by sort of a think tanky kind of a part of the government that often sort of comes out with reports, often worst case scenario reports that people might want to consider. That report, unlike how the Conservative leader portrayed it, does not represent the advice or even the predictions of the federal government about where social mobility in this country may be going by 2040. It was just laying out some scenarios that could be plausible but may not be, possible, and also sort of things that certainly certain government policies could disrupt the trajectory of those things. So Poilievre was saying, well, this will happen. That actually isn't how the report puts it. And
Sorry, I muted the thing. I said I don't understand why she's leaning over to the side. Her visual is kind of off there. It's weird. And I can't remember the other thing I said. I said something else, but I can't remember now. This whole push that Poilievre, I said Poilievre didn't even say the worst parts of the report. There were worse parts of the report that he omitted. And I just think it's a weak argument to not have the, to say, oh, you know, it doesn't even say that. The think tanky part of the government doesn't even say the things that he was saying. It does. And it says worse. Mark Carney says, this is an interesting one. Mark Carney wants to spend, and maybe has spent, $100 million on the United Nations sending food to Gaza. And I don't think most people want to spend their money on that. I think most people don't want to spend their money on that. Mark Carney says the UN World Food Program just announced that its food stocks in Gaza have run out because of the Israeli government's blockade. Food cannot be used as a political tool. Palestinian civilians must not bear the consequences of Hamas terrorist crimes. The World Food Program must be allowed to resume its life-saving work. Canada stands for international law and has recently committed an additional amount of nearly $100 million to support the United Nations and other trusted international partners in providing food and humanitarian aid. We will continue to work with our allies towards a permanent ceasefire and the immediate return of all hostages. So I think that we shouldn't be spending $100 million to send money or support the United Nations or other trusted international partners, because the trusted international partners don't seem to be too trusted. They seem to be like shysters. They seem to be people who are doing things that are working against the benefit of the West. And so we should probably stop doing that, stop funding it. And then Bruce says, meanwhile, here's your government using food as a political tool. In Canada, we get marijuana from stores and crack pipes from vending machines. But if you sell eggs, you get SWAT teams sent to your door. Small-scale Alberta egg farmer arrested for selling eggs outside of the quota system. So how dare you, sir? How dare you, right? And they'll send SWAT. Crazy town. Again, I think $100 million wasted to the United Nations, and I'm not convinced that it helps people. I'm not convinced that it sends food to people. I'm not convinced that it's a positive thing whatsoever. If, say, there's a magic wand and I'm the prime minister right now, and I say we're not doing that anymore. The amount of pushback, the amount of pearl clutching in the media, the amount of people calling in, the amount of protests, it would be crazy. But I think we need to stop sending money to foreign agencies, to foreign everything. $100 million is not insignificant. Holy smokeronies, right? Like if we have $100 million to just send willy-nilly to the United Nations for food for the Gaza Strip, then we should seriously be looking at massive tax breaks, because if we've got that kind of money, then you don't need to be taking money from me. Holy smoke. The food professor says, judging solely by the substance of the campaign, one might assume Mark Carney and the Liberals are in freefall. His campaign has been terrible. It does beg the question, are Canadians genuinely engaged or just hypnotized by the radiant glow of Mark Carney's teeth and globalist pedigree? I'm very, he doesn't actually say anything about Mark Carney's teeth, but hypnotized, I don't know, disaffected. I am of the opinion that really what Canadians think doesn't matter, and we are not going to, we don't actually get to participate in these elections. We get to pretend, we get to cast a vote, but the vote doesn't really matter. Dan McTeague says what smart people are saying, and he's copied this. He says, Dave says, I cannot be easily convinced that someone who refuses to answer uncomfortable questions isn't hiding something. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who has been caught lying multiple times about his past is trustworthy. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who locks citizens out of public appearances using his own staff and party staff as stand-in extras has any intention of listening to anyone. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who limits their appearances in an abbreviated election campaign isn't trying to limit negative exposure. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who has taken credit for others' work multiple times while deflecting accountability and responsibility for his own disasters, especially the last 5+ years of our economic policies, and the mess left in the UK is capable of any degree of integrity. I cannot be easily convinced that someone with legislative authority to cripple our domestic energy sector and his stated intention to do so while having corporate and personal interests in competing foreign energy sectors isn't putting his own interests above those of the country and the people he claimed to want to lead and protect. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who does have those holdings but claims to be a climate crusader who would normally abandon those holdings and either believes the climate hysteria so many others seem to, and or isn't intentionally using the that cloak as a deceptive manipulation to part a world of fools from their money. I cannot be easily convinced that someone with 3 passports and someone who hasn't lived in Canada for a decade has any allegiance here. I cannot be easily convinced that a high-ranking official from the climate and finance wing of the WEF, an organization admitted to wanting to push the green agenda at enormous cost on everyone, and an organization which brags about infiltrating governments, has come to save us in any way. I cannot be easily convinced that someone whose party has demonized opposition policies for a decade and is now adopting them during an election campaign has any intention of implementing any of them. I cannot be easily convinced that someone who wants the biggest military and economic threat to our biggest military and economic ally to take the driver's seat in a global financial restructuring can in any way deliver any kind of positive outcomes for us, let alone our other partners. I cannot at all be convinced that Mark Carney is fit for any kind of public office, let alone the Prime Minister's office. Can you? No, absolutely not. Not even a little tiny bit. Here's what's going on for Poilievre. Mr. Sunshine Baby is a fan, I guess, and he says, tonight was wild. Look at the photo from Pierre's team. This blows my mind. Nanaimo just showed up for change. What a night. So they're in an airport hangar, and a lot of people. People are saying between 3,000 and 5,000 attendees, and that's interesting. And A-Dub says, the crowd eagerly anticipating Pierre's arrival. There was a palpable buzz in the air. People were excited and happy to be there. And yeah, it was pretty cool when the hangar doors opened and Pierre's plane was outside. So there's Pierre's plane, and there's a Sunwing plane, and Poilievre right underneath the Sunwing. And he says Pierre began by honoring his hometown roots, and then he acknowledged his family. It didn't take a lot of video, but I happened to capture this moment. Hope it gives people an idea of the overall vibe. 26 seconds, sure. We'll watch. Here's rally from yesterday. It's hard to understand him, kind of echoey. It is what it is, but Aiden says, Pierre Poilievre, oh, there was more. Sorry, I'll scroll down. I'll continue to scroll down. There was more from this. What struck me most was the crowd. Progressives love droning about inclusion and diversity while ignoring diversity of thought. The diversity of people supporting the CPC at this rally was immense, and the number of young people attending was pronounced. I ran into a handful of friends, including a former student, and spoke with a few strangers from different walks of life. I chatted with Wyatt, Claypool, and Marty up north while doing so. Ultimately, I realized that this is a working class movement. There's no longer right versus left. Oh, no, there definitely is right versus left. There's only privileged class versus the rest of us. No, there's certainly subclasses down there. I can tell you. I've had conversations this morning that were eye-opening. This crowd represented the Canada I grew up in, he says. Maybe, but dig a little deeper because it's not what you think it is, unfortunately. Aiden says Pierre Poilievre announced that Parliament and MPs will sit through the summer and won't have a summer vacation until 3 monumental bills are passed. Safe Streets Act, Affordability Act, Bring Home Our Jobs Act. Who else agrees with this? Well, I'd have to read the bills, for crying out loud. We'll see. I think that drastic change needs to happen really, really quickly, personally, but I don't think that any of our political parties really represent that. Not the CPC, not the NDP, not the Liberals. PPC maybe, but I'm under no illusions. Like I've said, I don't think that our elections are above board. I think the elections are rigged. The polls are certainly rigged. And so I'm not holding my breath for PPC to get a seat or form government or anything like that. But it seems strange that the people are satisfied with this government, with this configuration of things, right? It seems very strange that people are just content to vote for the lesser of 2 globalist parties. It's weird. It's a very strange thing. Maxime Bernier says, I'm with Billboard Chris in Ottawa to demonstrate against the crazy gender ideology and abuse. So there's Bernier, and he was wearing a sign. I saw video of him wearing a sign talking about this. Police were keeping the protesters separate, so that's interesting. Man, just crazy how brainwashed a lot of people have become. It didn't take much. It's concerning how little it took, really. And it's not just these wackadoos who are brainwashed. There are a whole bunch of people who are parroting political talking points. And encouraging you not to think for yourself and instead encouraging you to blindly trust them that, this is going to fix all the problems and you've got to vote their way. And I don't think I can underline enough. You should do your own research. Don't listen to me. Just find out more if you're interested in a topic that I bring up and that you find interesting. Find out more. And I'm not the person who should tell you what to do. You should decide what to do based on what you want in your life and what's being offered and what that aligns with, right? Like if you want certain things and a political party is offering you a pathway to that, then trusting them and giving them your vote, that's a good idea. But don't listen to me, right? Don't listen to me about who you should vote for. You should find out what the political parties are offering and then vote for them, right? And so it's interesting that nobody else showed up to hang out with Billboard Chris talking about this gender ideology stuff. Why do you think our politicians are frightened of this mob, right? Do you think this mob represents a lot of voters, or are these the people who keep the politicians on a short leash, right? It's interesting. The enforcement arm of the globalist cabal. I don't know. Maxime Bernier says the supply management cartel is a mafia. It's organized crime, and you support that when you vote for any of the establishment parties. So Western Standard is reporting about small-scale Alberta egg farmer arrested for selling eggs outside the quota system. 5 RCMP vehicles arrived to arrest him. Oh, okay. I'm a danger to everybody because I sell eggs? Weird. That's very, very strange. Here's NDP, and this is Yves Francois Blanchette talking about how the NDP aren't easy to work with because they're two-faced and they'll tell you one thing while sliding in bed with the Liberals. So here's Yves Francois Blanchette.
This rhetoric between you and Mr. Singh of the NDP seems to be ratcheting up quite a lot. Isn't there a world where neither of you will get the results you wanted on Monday and your parties will actually have to work together in Parliament? And how will you do it when you keep insulting each other?
Last time we had an opportunity to sometimes work together. They basically insulted us and went to bed with the Liberals. I don't expect it to be any better. And they made a good decision, however, because they created kind of a controversy which gives them exposure, which they wouldn't have had otherwise.
So the whole point was the exposure is, I think, the argument he's saying. But they insulted us and got in bed with the Liberals, and I don't expect anything else. Yeah, right? They don't want to work with anybody. They don't want to address anything. They don't want to admit their faults or mistakes. They don't want to do anything real. Here's Jagmeet Singh, week left before the election, and he's showing us how to do his beard. For real. I'm not even joking. My hair looks terrible this morning. Here we go.
Yes, I got you. So last week of the campaign, and I'm going to break down how I get my beard sorted, how I do my beard. So get ready with me. Beard edition. I'm going to start with putting my hair.
Nope. Absolutely. This is the only thing I could think of when I was watching. I was like, wow, I don't think I could care less about the NDP. And then Jagmeet Singh comes and does something like that. What? Talk about out of touch, right? What the heck, man? Here's concerned Canadian. Never trust a Liberal, according to Jagmeet Singh. Coming from him, that's thin because he propped the Liberals up for years. So here we go.
I say this with respect and a little bit sadly, but never trust a Liberal. The only way and proven by our history Liberals do the right thing are when New Democrats force them to do.
Unbelievable. Arrogance and out of touch is just only the beginning of describing Jagmeet Singh. Here's Kevin, and this is an NDP. He's a former NDP riding president, Elliot Galbraith, and he drove his bike into kids at a rally and harassed Kevin Vung. And Kevin Vung says, this guy verbally assaulted and harassed my wife. He yelled and screamed at kids and drove his bike into families. When Elizabeth asked him to stop, he said that she's a target too because she's my wife. It's alarming to learn that he's not only with the NDP, he's the riding president. And so the NDP tried to say, okay, here it is. Spadina Fort York NDP say, Elliot Galbraith has not been a member of our riding association since 2014. He was on the website yesterday. This guy says, Elliot was listed on your website as federal riding president as recently as yesterday afternoon. Your federal and provincial candidates have also given conflicting statements to residents in the neighborhood who are asking what happened and why has Elliot gone into hiding. So yeah, they say Elliot has not been a member of our riding association since 2014, and this video in no way represents our views on the safety of families and children as we work to end homelessness. They're not working to end homelessness. Homelessness is a grift, and they make money and employ people based on that homelessness grift. The government gives money to agencies to, quote, end homelessness, and those agencies employ people. And where would they go if they ended homelessness? The money would dry up, right? They're incentivized to keep homelessness because they want their job. They're helping, you see. Unbelievable. We've spoken with Elliot, and he takes ownership and apologizes for his actions. Well, if he's ramming bikes into people, that's assault. So where's Elliot? Dan McTeague, there's a couple of election grab bag things that don't fit neatly into any of the party areas. And Dan McTeague is responding to Stockwell Day. Stockwell Day says, we are seeing the highest turnout in advanced polling in Canadian history. Is it not a little strange that there are few, if any, exit polls being done to see how people are voting? Why are leftist organizations like CBC and Politico not telling us what their polls are showing? Interesting. Dan says, exactly. Pollsters and pundits are in for a surprise that risks eliminating their credibility. They don't have any credibility. They haven't had credibility for a long, long time, I don't think. 2020 was 2020, 2016, right? Hillary Clinton was 91% to win against Trump. That did not happen. No credibility. Here's Ms. Fee. She says, I'm not okay with this. Global News says, after a record-shattering turnout during advanced polling, Elections Canada will allow some ridings to start counting ballots a little earlier. And that's not good, according to Jason Levine. He says, they're not telling us which ridings these are in. And as we have a right to have scrutineers there, with nameless ballots, advanced voting before registrations were closed, candidates missing on ballots, and now counting in the dark, the fix may be in. And so, maybe. Here's the article. It says, Elections Canada will let poll workers in some ridings, and who knows which ones, start counting advanced ballots a little earlier, owing to the record number of votes cast in early voting on Easter weekend. Preliminary estimates released by Elections Canada on Tuesday showed 7.3 million votes cast on the ballot at advanced polls during this past weekend, a 25% increase from the 5.8 million votes in the 21 federal election. Ordinarily, vote counting does not begin until polls closed. However, election law in Canada allows the chief electoral officer to make exceptions on the request of the district returning officers to start counting advanced ballots up to 1 hour before polls close. Due to the high number of advanced ballots cast in advanced polls, Elections Canada has received special dispensations to allow for counting of advanced votes to begin up to 2 hours before polls close. This will take place in only some ridings, and the returning officer would have to request permission and receive permission from the chief electoral officer. So are we going to know which ridings are counting early? That's interesting. Elections Canada has said special exemption has already been granted for the Ottawa area riding of Carleton, where 91 candidates, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, are on the ballot. The larger than usual size of the ballot means it could take poll workers longer to count the votes. So advanced vote counting in that riding will be allowed to begin 6 hours before the poll close in an effort to have results from there in a timely fashion. While millions of Canadians have already voted, millions more will vote Monday. On the day of the general election, voting hours are staggered so that the majority of results are available at approximately the same time across the country. Polls will be open for 12 hours to find your polling station. So I don't know when the result is expected, 10 o'clock or something like that. I'm not sure. Seems plausible. I don't know when we're going to stop the stream today, but it'll be around now, I guess, or before now. This is interesting. Maple Ridge guy says, does this sound familiar? I think it does. This is worth 2 minutes of our time. It's almost 4 minutes. The whole 4 minutes is worth it as well, but this will give you a taste of what he's talking about. Here we go.
If you're wondering why the society you've lived in all your life feels as if it's being pulled from under you like a rug, it's because while you weren't paying attention, your wholesome values were quietly reclassified as ugly prejudices, and now you are the problem. You believe in free speech? No, you believe in hate speech, and now you're a criminal. You like democratic sovereignty? Then you're a xenophobe and a fascist. No platform for you. You want a secular society, you Islamophobic racist? You're spreading hate, and you better be using the right pronoun too, if you don't want to be excluded for the sake of inclusion. In short, there's no place for you or your kind in the bright new tomorrow we're building. Now that the minds of an entire generation have been thoroughly rinsed through a progressive education that hates Western culture and everything it stands for, and everything that you hold dear, there's been a climate change that you didn't see coming. The climate has changed against you and your privilege, and without wishing to put too fine a point on it, your presence is no longer required. The best way to destroy the foundations of a society is to teach its young people not to respect them. And a whole generation has now been successfully taught not to value free speech, the very cornerstone of our civilization, but to hold it in contempt and to fear it, to run from it, to seek refuge from ideas in emotional safe spaces, and to believe that hurting somebody's feelings is a form of assault on a par with cracking their skull. This tyranny of feelings has been carefully nurtured to breed this infantile generation of emotional casualties, victims and crybabies, this generation of moral and political half-wits who can't wait to sign the next petition to shut somebody up or shut somebody down, never thinking for a moment that it could ever happen to them. A generation so placidly happy to soar off the branch they're sitting on, it's almost as if they've been programmed in some way. So if you think that you've got the truth on your side, you don't know what you're up against. The truth is incorrect and therefore inadmissible. If you think that you've got the law on your side, forget it. The law protects feelings now, but not your feelings. Your feelings are hate. Well,
get it? And he continues to make as reasonable a point. Here is that what he's talking about in action. Karima, I was getting her name wrong. Karima gets permission from the police, and then the black bloc dressed guys. So these are disruptors. These are people who are flying in specifically to disrupt, are coming in to disrupt, and they get arrested. So here's this.
Get away from the schools! Go home fast! Get your picture, get your picture.
We are in front of a local public school on Broadview Avenue. Police kindly escorted us to this area so that we could get a shot with the flagpoles in the background. A couple of black bloc agitators followed us.
Not a good idea. Trans rights are human rights.
So unfortunately, police tried to assist. Ultimately, we're not able to keep us there safely. We agreed in advance.
So pretty crazy stuff, and then these guys got arrested. I think it's a woman. I think that person being carried there is a woman. So that's pretty interesting stuff. What he's talking about here, those people will be protected. This person here that's got arrested, she'll be out on bail. So the whole thing is rigged. The whole system is stacked against people who want sanity, want predictable and reasonable people in charge. But the people in charge currently are chanting trans rights are human rights. And I mean, you can't change your gender, man. You can't do it. It's just not possible. If you cut off your penis and your balls, you are just a man, a mutilated man. Like, you're not a woman then. You just have a hole where your penis should be. That's it. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful